So, what if I told you that a country, a place that was basically an economic wasteland, could, in just 30 years, become wealthier than Portugal and the manufacturing engine for an entire continent? You'd probably think it's some kind of fairy tale, right? Well, this is the real and pretty gritty story of Poland. I want you to just picture this for a second. It's Warsaw, 1989. The communist government has just collapsed, and it left a total disaster in its wake. I mean, you could have millions of zlotys in your pocket, but that money is completely worthless. You can't buy bread, you can't find meat. The economy wasn't just broken, it was basically dead on arrival.
Okay, now fast forward to today and just look at that contrast. From total economic ruin to a European powerhouse, from hyperinflation that made money useless to a point where some analysts think its economy might one day overtake the UK's. So, the big question we're tackling here is how on earth did this seemingly impossible transformation actually happen?
Well, the first step wasn't gentle. Not at all. Most countries try to fix a broken economy with, like, a Band-Aid. Poland? They chose to perform surgery with a chainsaw. This was the era of shock therapy, and it was all led by a guy named Leszek Balsidowicz.
To really get why they needed such brutal measures, you just have to understand one number that pretty much defined the chaos: 640%. That was the rate of inflation. I mean, just think about that. You get your paycheck in the morning, and by lunchtime, it's already lost half its value. The government was printing money so fast, it was basically just paper. The situation was absolutely desperate.
So the solution was something called shock therapy. This was the Balcerowicz plan, and the strategy was as simple as it was terrifying. Do everything, and do it all at once. No slow, gentle transitions. On January 1st, 1990, they didn't just tweak the system. They threw the entire rulebook out the window overnight.
And the immediate consequences? They were brutal. Prices for things like food and fuel just exploded. Those huge state-owned factories that had guaranteed jobs for life, they were suddenly told to sink or swim. And you know what? Most of them sank. Unemployment shot up to 20% in some areas. People were literally selling their wedding rings on the street just to get by. It was this dark, dangerous, Wild East kind of era.
But here's the crazy part. It worked. I mean, just look at the comparison with its neighbor, Ukraine. Ukraine chose a slower, less painful path. And back in 1990, Ukraine was actually richer than Poland. But today, Poland's economy is 3 times larger. By just ripping the Band-Aid off and taking all that pain up front, Poland stopped the hyperinflation dead in its tracks. And it created a whole generation of people who knew they had to either hustle or starve. And you know what? They chose to hustle.
Okay, so with that initial shock over, Poland had to start building a real functioning economy. And their strategy was brilliant. They decided to become the indispensable workshop of Europe, using this unique combination of pure hard work and a massive, once-in-a-generation flood of cash.
So when Poland joined the European Union in 2004, the floodgates just opened. The EU sent a truly staggering amount of money, a sum so huge it actually rivals the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Western Europe after World War II. They're called cohesion funds, and it's basically money from richer EU countries to help the poorer ones catch up. For Poland, it was like a golden rain. But here's the thing. Poland didn't just spend the money. They invested it with almost military precision. They pulled off this incredible economic judo move. See, they took German and French money and used it to pave their country with over 4,000 kilometers of modern highways. And this new infrastructure dramatically lowered their own shipping costs, which then allowed Polish companies to become fiercely competitive against the very nations that had paid for the roads in the first place.
And this is where they revealed their secret weapon. It wasn't just that their labor was cheap. It was that they offered high-quality labor at a discount. The average Polish worker puts in about 500 more hours a year than their German counterpart. They're highly educated, they have technical degrees, and they have that post-communist hustle, that intense drive to succeed that was born from decades of scarcity. They integrated themselves so deeply into the German supply chain that, I'm not kidding, if Poland stopped working tomorrow, German industry would probably collapse by Tuesday.
So the foundation was laid and the engine was humming. But the ultimate test of this whole new economic model was about to come. It came in 2008, when the entire global financial system basically had a complete nervous breakdown.
We all remember 2008, right? Lehman Brothers collapsed, housing markets just imploded, banks were failing left and right. It was absolute global financial chaos. Every single country in the European Union saw their economies shrink and fall into a deep, painful recession. All of them,
except one.
Yeah, while the rest of the continent was just drowning in red ink, Poland's economy actually grew. It grew. This unbelievable performance earned it the nickname the Green Island. So how is this even possible? How did a country that was an economic basket case just 18 years earlier manage to survive the biggest crash since the Great Depression?
Well, it came down to a mix of paranoia, a bit of luck, and some really smart policy. First, because of their traumatic past, Polish bankers were extremely conservative. They were boring, which in 2008 turned out to be a superpower. It meant they hadn't bought into all those toxic subprime mortgages that crippled Western banks. Second, and this is so critical, they still had their own currency, the zloty. When the crash hit, the zloty's value dropped, which instantly made Polish exports about 30% cheaper for everyone else. And finally, the government just kept spending on huge infrastructure projects, which kept people employed.
So, Poland proved it could build things and it could survive a crisis. But to join the ranks of the truly wealthy nations, it has to face its final boss battle, making the leap from an economy of factories to an economy of ideas.
And you know, the signal for this pivot came from a pretty unlikely place. Video games. CD Projekt Red, the people who made the hit game The Witcher, they started out as a couple of guys selling pirated CDs at a street market. Their global success was like a signal flare for the whole country. Poland realized it had this secret weapon, a legacy from the communist era of an education system that was heavily focused on math, engineering, and the hard sciences. They had this huge pool of untapped STEM talent just waiting to build the next generation of tech.
But this brings us to the crucial challenge Poland is facing right now. It's something economists call the middle income trap. Basically, wages have gone up so much that Poland is no longer the cheap factory of Europe. But to compete with the wealthiest nations like Germany or the US, it has to innovate and create its own global brands, from software to biotech. If it can't make that leap, its growth just stalls.
And making this challenge even harder is a ticking time bomb. Poland is dying. Literally, its fertility rate is way below the 2.1 children per woman needed just to keep the population stable. The country is shrinking by the size of a small city every single year. You just can't run an economic miracle when you're running out of people.
And this leads to one of the great ironies of modern Europe. To solve this massive labor shortage, Poland has been forced to import workers. The very same government that won elections by campaigning against migrants is now quietly overseeing the largest wave of immigration in the country's entire history. From Ukraine, Belarus, India, the Philippines, it's a total transformation, and it's driven by pure economic necessity.
So the real victory for Poland, when you think about it, might be psychological. 30 years ago, Poles looked at the West with this deep inferiority complex. Today, that is completely gone. In fact, many people there now see their own country as safer, more dynamic, and hungrier than a West they feel has become comfortable and maybe a little lazy. That ambition that wants to find the West, it's alive and kicking in Warsaw.
So, Poland has run this incredible 30-year ultramarathon. It crawled out of the wreckage of history to catch up with the leaders. But now comes the hardest part. It can't just copy what rich countries did anymore. It has to innovate on its own. And that leaves us with the big question. Can the student who mastered the game finally become the master?